Thank you so much for tuning in to Exit Ready. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. We're going to unpack ways for you to make your company more valuable so that when you get ready to exit, you can get the most money possible. Now to the show. Dallin, we had a deal. We're not going to talk about Texas Tech, BYU, but you wore the shirt, man. You wore the shirt, not me. I wore just a red
Yeah,
shirt.
I asked for it.
Okay, give everybody a quick introduction to who you are and what you do, and let's hop into it here.
Yeah, so I'm Dallin Drescher. I'm an M&A attorney based out of Utah. I've been in the M&A world for going back to 2019, so I guess 6 years now. I've been at my current firm for almost four. We're a corporate boutique, and M&A is kind of our bread and butter. So we do a lot of that, and then stuff stemming out from it, whether it's fractional general counsel work or we do investment funds, real estate, all sorts of stuff. But M&A is kind of where we stake our claim and what I love to be involved in.
Yeah. And so you have the moniker, the Sellers Council. So do you mainly work with sellers or some buyers too, or what's the thought there?
Yeah. Yeah. So our firm, we do sellers and buyers. But on X, I've kind of dubbed myself the Sellers Council. And part of that is just because I love working with sellers. I think it's really fun, engaging work, and our sell side representations are some of my funnest deals. But I've been on X for a while, kind of reading and lurking, and there's a lot of information out there for people that want to buy a business, and I felt like not a ton for people that want to sell a business, and so trying to bring a little more light and information to help those people out.
Yeah, that is one thing. I was working with buyers for a little while, and I got kind of frustrated. I say frustrated. I had some good buyers, but a lot of people who say they're buyers, they don't really understand what it takes to even buy a business. And the same is true of sellers. And right now, and
Right.
I'm not being disparaging on the influencer world, but there's a lot of talk to buyers because I think it's easier to probably get them to be a client.
Yeah.
Whereas sellers, they have a business, they're busy, they're running it, and they don't really understand, like, hey, I need to be doing these things to prepare for an exit. But the buyer's like, oh, I
Right.
want to buy. And then a lot of the buyers that came to me, there's kind of two categories. We had the buyers who were, you know, they took some course. And I'm not against courses. They took a course, like, I'm gonna go buy a business. Like, man, this is some work. Like, this is serious work.
Right. Yeah.
And a lot of the advice on X would be, oh, it's a million EBITDA, it needs to be this. It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, that's gonna be really. It's needle in a haystack. Good luck, buddy. You can find that, but
Right.
you're really, really tough. And so, why do you think that is? Though, do you think it's just that it's easier to attract buyers as clients, or why do you think it is that a lot of the content's not really for sellers?
Yeah. So I think there's kind of twofold. I mean, I guess from a self-interested perspective, there's definitely, I think, more advantage to like hooking the buyer because they're going to be continuing in the business. And so long term, you can kind of have that more long-term relationship, right? Whereas sellers, in some cases, they're going to flip and go to something else, but in a lot of cases, they're going to retire and not need your services anymore. So I think that plays into it to an extent. But I think the whole entrepreneurship through acquisition community has kind of exploded. And so there's a lot of people searching for that information out there of, how do I buy a business? I know I want to, but I need steps through it. Whereas sellers, I think generally there's still a lot of people that aren't actively looking to sell their business. It's more of like it gets thrust upon them because they get a great offer and then they just kind of go with the process versus being proactive about it, which and a lot of times could bring them more money and make the process easier for them.
Yeah, well, when you got people hitting you up, and I've heard owners say, well, I'll wait until a good offer comes. And I kind of debate over, we were approached when I was much younger at the company I was working at to be bought out, and we didn't go through with it. But it was a strategic. They're talking about going public, and so they came to us because we were a competitor, and they're like, "Hey, we buy you out. We're going public," and so it made sense. But they're like,
Yeah.
"What's your EBITDA?" And we're like, "EBITDA."
Right.
We didn't even know, and so if you're a seller and you're waiting, and it turns out that the deal fell apart because they didn't end up going public, but that one term right there, and we don't want to break down EBITDA on this podcast, but that one term, like if you don't know what that means and how to construct it, I've seen companies that were 50 million in revenue that had their EBITDA miscalculated. And so like I think a lot of sellers, to your point, they kind of hope for that offer to come in, but is it
Yeah.
even a great offer is one question, and could it have been a better offer by changing one or two or three things, a year or two in advance? And a lot of sellers aren't being told that, and so I've kind of equated to I need to find a better analogy, but when you think about selling your business, are you trying to sell it to the McDonald's of the world? And nothing wrong with McDonald's. I love McDonald's. I'm a fat guy, so I like food.
Right.
Or you try to sell like a
Right.
high end burger joint, or Ruth's Chris or whatever. Well, if you understand that there's levels of buyers, it
Totally.
doesn't mean that you're going to sell to the biggest PE group in the world. But if you understand that there are levels of buyers, and those levels are looking for different things, then you will begin to formulate your business to be set up for that. And I think that message is really being lost to owners because, to your point, the buyer's kind of doing the work, going to find the deal, and then bringing it in. It's like, well, the seller needs a plan because that's a great buyer, but there's also other buyers who might be better and pay more money.
Totally, exactly. It's kind of like when you sell your house. Like, I mean, I get mailers all the time of random investors that are like, "Hey, I'll buy your house for this much," and I look at it, I'm like, "Okay, my house is worth more than that." And I know if I just took a little bit of time, and went through an actual process, I could sell it for way more than that if I actually wanted to sell. And everyone seems to get that with selling their house or selling their car or things like that. But when it comes to selling their business, it's just kind of not for everyone, but for a lot of people, it becomes an afterthought, and it's like, okay, yeah, sure, let's do this, versus a well thought out plan process. Hang on, I lost your audio. Can you hear me still?
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry. Um, I was saying that for a lot of owners, it seems that they wait until, as you mentioned, they get that big offer, or some event happens, something happens, and it's like, okay, now I want to sell. But the stories you hear about are, Bob walked in and offered me a bunch of money, and I got that. That's what you hear about, but that's not the
Right.
reality. Like most owners, they're not going to get that, and so. From your perspective, what have you seen that has ended deals because the seller just didn't do the prep or they had to take a major haircut because they didn't do the prep work that they should have done?
Yeah. So I get this question a lot of what kills deals and what doesn't, right? And I think there's good things that kill deals, and then there's bad things. And by good and bad, I mean like there's good things in the sense of you find information that this deal probably should not happen, and everyone's probably better off not doing it. Those are things like financial due diligence, things like valuation gaps. Like that's probably a common one to directly answer your question. Is people will set their business up in a way that whether they're carrying too much debt or they have lifestyle expectations to where I need to get $20 million out of this business if I'm going to walk away from it. But if your numbers don't support that valuation, you're never going to be able to get it, right? Um, and so those are kind of the two big ones for me: the financial due diligence of your numbers not actually being validated and verified, and then the valuation gap where there's just not enough revenue or EBITDA there to support the number you need to get out of it. That are probably the good reasons I would say to kill a deal, and that something's going to have to change in order for any deal to get done with any buyer and seller. I also think there's a lot of bad things that end up killing. Sorry, go for it. I think you're muted again though.
I gotta get a hotkey, so I just press this button.
Yeah,
Um,
you're good.
so I just want to talk about the financial stuff because so if you're I don't what size deal is your average that you're working on here?
Yeah, we're typically, I would say most of ours are like lower middle market to middle market, so like 10 to, I don't know, $75 million.
Okay, so in the 10 to 75 million range, let me just preface this by saying I've talked to a lot of owners who thought their company was in that range and it was nowhere near. So let me just
Fair.
preface that.
Yeah, fair.
but
Yeah,
but but
sure.
but one of the things that we've seen on smaller deals, like the SBA size deals, is they've ran a bunch of expenses to the business to lower their tax burden, and then they have to go tell the SBA that that's not true, and then they got to fix their taxes, and now that number,
Right.
that $3 million, well, you got a tax burden you got to pay because of that. Does that happen the same way on these bigger deals where they've kind of ran certain expenses through, and so they've got to go back and refile their taxes, and they run into problems like that?
Yeah, we see that, and we do plenty of deals in the sub 10 million too. Um, and it's definitely more common on those smaller deals. And I think the reason is that the more you grow and scale, you tend to not be able to run it as tight knit. Like you have to kind of grow, expand your executive team. You might bring in other investors, and so it's harder to kind of have that fudge the numbers between which of this is my business and which of this is personal, right? So it's less often that we have to go back and do the fixing the taxes and the add backs and things like that. But it's definitely happens a ton in the sub $10 million range, which is all the more reason to be proactive about it. Because if you have, 2 to 3 years of runway and know you want to sell this thing eventually, it's pretty easy to make those changes and not have it cause issues when you're doing due diligence. But if you come to me at the LOI, or really not me, but you come to the tax planner or the M&A planner and say, we're under LOI and here's my financials, and they find all these errors, then it gets really messy and tricky to justify that to the SBA, to justify it to the buyer. It's just, it makes it a lot harder. Sorry, mute.
I swear I clicked the button that time. Okay. I have to get my daughter to help me. Kate, you're watching this because they help me edit the stuff. Help me get a hotkey on here so I just press the button. Um, yeah, I think a lot of owners, you know, when they think about selling and where they're going to go, you mentioned kind of this, 2 3 year runway, and that's kind of the consensus is okay, 2 3 years.
Yeah.
Um, but there's also things that happen, like cancer or death or something that can make it speed up. So, you can wait 2 3 years, but that's kind of a risk. And so I talked to them about what's
Yeah.
your risk, like how much risk are you want to take if this falls apart? What's
Right.
your risk? Um, but the other thing there is when you look at how you're going to value your company. I try to stress that you got to think about it from the buyer standpoint. So if it's a $10 to $75 million deal, you're asking someone to write a check. I don't care if it's 3 million, 10 million, 50 million. You're asking someone to write a check or borrow that money or however it's going to work
Right. Right.
for that much money. And you think that you can kind of finagle your way around here. It's like, oh man, if you want 3 million or 30 million, the tighter that you are on this stuff, again, going back to the level of buyers, the better buyer you're going to attract. And I remember talking to a PE group one time. We were doing some kind of buy side work and stuff like that. And they said, well, we really prefer dealing with companies who are already under agreement with an M&A broker or M&A advisor because it's cleaner. They know it's
Right.
cleaner. And
Right.
so that's a PE company
Yeah.
saying that. And so everybody's selling a PE course, but I just don't think that a lot of owners, they kind of go, oh, this is great. They live in that world every day. And they just kind of forget,
Yeah.
man, you're asking for millions of dollars. It better look good. Would you risk millions of dollars, for what you're saying? And it's a disconnect that's kind of missed, I think, by most owners.
Totally. Yeah. And I tell sellers all the time, like, a buyer is going to come in expecting your business to have some hair on it, right? Like, you don't need to have a perfect business. If you did, like, there'd be no reason to sell it. But at the same time, the buyer's stress level is already kind of elevated, especially in these sub $10 million deals, because there's usually a whole lot more riding on it. They're usually getting financing for it. And this might be the first time they've ever done it. And so they're already kind of high alert, knowing they're taking on this risk. And every little thing that is not clean, or that you have to explain, or you have to justify, even if your justifications are good, that stress level is going to increase with each one until they finally potentially hit a point where they say, this is just too much risk for me. I can't handle it. And so the more you can do to ease the process and make things really easy for the buyer, it can actually lower that stress level, increase the likelihood that the deal closes.
Yeah, no, I agree. I talked to an owner one time, and he was like, they did 30 million in revenue. He goes, well, but if I go away, this company closes. And I'm like, oh, go, oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah.
well, what are you gonna like? I get the pride that comes with that, but that seems to be a big issue is the
Right.
pride, and I don't know if that trickles up to. I mean, the biggest deal we had closed this year, I think, was it's like 52 million. There's some earnout, so 40 million was the cash. But anyways, um, and that guy was really kind of understood his position, like where he needed to be, understood the mentality, and was excited
Yeah.
about work with P and all that stuff. But I think a lot of owners, because they work so hard to grow this thing, that when someone approaches them, there's almost they want a premium for the pride. It's kind of like you mentioned selling the house, and it's like, well, no one cares
Yeah.
that you hand put the desk in the room. No one cares that you paint it
Totally.
yourself. Like it's just not value. And so, what are some things that you mentioned some we're talking about the financial stuff. I kind of interrupted you. So if you'll go back to
Yeah.
some of the negative stuff you've seen, because I'm kind of curious what your thoughts on or what you've seen from that perspective. Quick break here. I don't do ads on this podcast, and so this is an ad for the Exit Ready cohort. You can find a link below. If you're a business owner and you're thinking about selling, I don't care if it's 1 year or 5 years, you need to be a part of this so that you make sure your company is worth the most it can be when you go to market.
Yeah, so I think, I kind of I keep an internal list of like, here are bad things that cause deals to not close. And by bad, I just mean like we totally could have avoided this and it was just an unnecessary issue. And I mean, to be fair, like at least in our practice, I don't see a ton of deals closing because of this. Like most deals that we take on, once we're past the LOI and the initial draft of the purchase agreement, like I can say with 85, 90% confidence that they're going to close. But occasionally you get weird ones that it, it's just issues that you could have prevented. So like the number one that I don't always see in my practice, but I see a lot of other people talk about is using a seller's attorney that is not an M&A professional. For whatever reason in M&A, we get lots of sellers that just will pick whichever attorney they've used before, whether it was for their divorce or estate planning or whatever. And they come in and they don't know the process. They don't understand what they're doing. And typically, from what I've seen and heard, the seller ends up paying just as much for worse representation, and it completely muddies the waters for everyone. Like it just makes it harder and it makes it less likely the deal's going to close, and they're not even saving money. So that one to me is completely avoidable if you just take the time to choose competent M&A counsel, and it's going to make the process easier for everyone. Um, Kind of some other ones that I see commonly, I call it mismatched expectations, but it's where there's a deal point that is sticky and weird from the beginning, and you just kind of punt on it. And maybe you don't include it in the LOI or you talk about it for a second up front and then you can't agree on it. And so you say, oh, we'll figure it out down the road, and then you never figure it out. And so you've done all this work and all this negotiation, and then you get to the end and it's like, well, we're still fighting over the survival period for reps and warranties. And we knew we were going to fight about that day one. And so if we couldn't solve it day one, we should just figure it out right then and either walk away or solve it, right? But often people think that you can kick the can and figure it out later, and it just doesn't work that way in my experience. Those are probably my two big ones. I mean, I think poor tax planning sometimes comes up in the end that people just don't think about it until we're about to close and they realize what the tax burden is going to be. And then the other one is bad actors, right? It's people acting nefariously, which in my experience happens very seldomly, but it does come up.
Yeah. Okay, so I wrote a list over here so I can go back through them. So the big
Yeah,
one that you talked about was the lawyers, and I've
yeah,
stressed this before. Just because your cousin is a divorce attorney or an injury attorney or whatever, doesn't
right,
mean you should use him for this. He might be great at what he does, but here, so two parts. Why do other attorneys who don't specialize in M&A take this type of work? Because I'm
yeah,
guessing if I got in a workman's comp claim, you might not take it for me. Um,
right,
and then two, just from an outside non-lawyer perspective, why can't they do it? Like you're lawyers, you should know the law. Like why can't you do this?
yeah. Yeah, so to answer the first, I think it's a combination of things. I think number one, like most lawyers, we have this like I don't want to call it a God complex, but like we want to be all knowledgeable. And so when people ask us a question expecting we know the answer, and you have to fight this urge to make it up or act confident when you actually don't know the answer. And I think it's a human thing, but lawyers especially have problems with this, and like I catch myself doing it sometimes. So that's probably a part. The other part is like everyone knows that M&A for attorneys is one of the most lucrative fields. And candidly, the document portion, the drafting portion is not entirely difficult. Like the skill most people can do pretty easily. And so I think there's definitely incentive to say, well, yeah, I can do that. And for the price, absolutely, I'll figure it out. the issue with that is like what you're paying an M&A attorney for isn't just the skill of drafting the documents. It's more the experience, the professionalism, the just the general know-how of how to navigate this deal, how everything fits together, and how to get you from start to finish that you really can't get a handle on unless you're doing this regularly. It's just not going to be possible. In terms of like why they don't know how to do it, like the experience thing is part of it, and I think it's in part it's a general misunderstanding of how legal education works. Like most of us go to law school and we're taught very little practical skills. And the practical skills that we are taught are almost all directly related to litigating in a courtroom. Like most of my legal education was teaching me how to go argue in front of the Supreme Court, which is something that I never intend to do. And so if you're not actively learning outside of that experience to be a transactional lawyer and to negotiate M&A deals, you're just not equipped with the level of skills and experience necessary to do it.
Yeah, the three most powerful words for anyone in business is "I don't know." Like if you can learn to
Yeah.
say that,
Yeah.
because it
Mhm.
builds trust. It sounds so weird, but it builds
Right.
trust. By saying "I don't know," people begin to go, "Oh, wait, he doesn't know." But when he does know, he's going to tell me. But and so
Right.
it's counterintuitive, but it's actually probably the biggest money maker you can learn is by saying
Totally.
I don't
Yeah.
know, I don't know. Talk to Tom, talk to Betty, talk to whoever.
Yeah.
Not me. I'm not the
Yeah.
person for that. And so yeah, that's common across all issues. But we can make fun of lawyers if you want. That's fine. I'm not gonna get mad at you about that. Okay. So you mentioned sticky issues, and so you use some verbiage there. Maybe unpack some of that verbiage, indemnification and stuff like that, warranties and reps. So unpack some of that. But
Yeah.
then what are some sticky issues? And then you said, well, if we can't solve it now, we're probably not gonna solve it later. And part of me thought, well, okay, if I'm listening to this, I'm going, well, the pressure of the deadline might make you change your mind. So why is it that if you can't solve it early, you can't solve it later?
Yeah. And it really is more of an art than a science. And as I explain my answer, I'm probably going to give conflicting information, which is just the classic lawyer, it depends, right? But for me, a sticky issue. So let's kind of start at the beginning. Like my stance on LOIs or term sheets or whatever you want to call them is generally a very broad strokes approach. Like I don't want you to give me the entire deal in an LOI because we don't have time to negotiate it right now and it's just silly. So give me the broad strokes, give me the big deal points. But if you have a special issue, one that's specially important or one that typically you wouldn't expect to see in an M&A deal, in my mind, that needs to come up at the LOI too. Um, it's kind of hard to say exactly what it is, but like an example off the top of my head is like if you as a buyer want a 4-year survival period for the reps and warranties, that's weird. Like that's not a common ask. And so you should communicate that up front if that's something that you absolutely have to have because you're going to get pushback on it down the road. Um, like I said, it's more art than science, but it's just kind of the sense of is this outside of the normal scope for most transactions in this area? And probably for me, the answer of like, well, should we kick the can down the road or should we solve it right now? Is the question comes down to for your individual self as a buyer or seller is if they ultimately hold their ground on this issue, do I think there's ever a world where I could close over it and just live with it? And if you think that's a possibility, then sure, kicking the can is probably okay. But if you're dead set in your mind of no matter what, I cannot live with anything other than this exact deal point, then in my mind, you've got to solve it as early as you can because there's always the chance that the other side feels the exact same way about it. And if you're at a continual impasse and you know you're never going to get past it, then you're just signing up for either one, increased costs with an issue that you knew you couldn't get past, or two, one of you being incredibly frustrated and giving in on something you never wanted to and probably regretting it down the road.
So, okay, let me back up here for a second.
Yeah.
Is your advice to owners before they sign the LOI to call you guys? Because earlier it kind of sounded like you said that you kind of come in after LOI has been signed, but hearing that, it's like, should they talk to you before they even sign the LOI?
Yeah. So it is very common for us to not come in until the LOI is signed. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
poor practice. I think, especially because most lawyers will not take very long to review an LOI and give you some comments on it. So the price you're going to pay for it is very small compared to the value you're going to get. The reason I think that you should involve someone early is to prevent that mismatched expectation of getting a deal point in the LOI that you probably wouldn't have agreed to if you had talked with your lawyer first. And I know the LOI is non-binding, but it still just muddies the negotiation if you come back to it and have to retrade on it later. So while it's common for people to wait until the LOI, I think a lawyer should be involved earlier and actually kind of, not to get too far on a tangent, but going back to the whole preparation thing, I think one of the most valuable things someone can do that thinks they might want to sell their business over the next, I don't know, 2, 3, even 5 years is to go find an M&A attorney, give them, $5,000 and say, here's my corporate book, here's my main contracts, here's kind of a small version of a data room that I would give. And I want you to take this $5,000 and spend time looking at it and then give me a list of high level potential issues that you see. This is going to give you two things, right? As a seller, is first, it'll give you a list of issues of potential cleanup to make the deal easier. But second, it gives you a trial period working with that lawyer to know if you like them or not. Oftentimes, you pick a lawyer, you hire them after the LOI, they do the deal docs, and by the time you realize whether you actually like working with them or not, you're halfway into the deal and it's too expensive to switch anyone. So this gives you a kind of cheap entry level, hey, do I like this guy or not? I can feel confident going forward with the representation.
Yeah, and okay, so you touched on something there that I want to address. I've got a
Yeah.
contrarian take here, so you might disagree with me. I think
Okay.
more owners would be better suited openly talking about the mentality of their view on exiting way earlier than 3 weeks before they sell. Like three
Right.
years. And they can structure bonuses, contract, all their stuff is around, hey, one day, just like you people might leave and quit and get another job, I'm going to leave here too, or I might die, or something might happen. And so having that as part of the culture, you can put the bonuses in place that say, okay, hey, here's our bonus based upon just a normal year, and if we sell and we get to this level, this is how the bonuses work. All of a sudden, now the employees are there to help you make your company more valuable, which makes you more money and makes them more money. So, by you're talking about talking to this attorney, early on, I think yes, and it should be a company wide thing. Like, hey, we're going to have the mentality that we want to be exit ready so that we know that whatever that day comes, we're there. Everything's set up as best it can be. Instead of a lot of owners, and I get it because this is kind of the culture for the past, I don't know, eternity, but it was like wait to the last moment to spring it on them. It's like, oh man, okay,
Yeah.
I think there's a better way. And part of, like, so if you said, hey, if you're doing 50 million a year, you need to put together a data room. Well, you've got to get certain players involved, anyways, right? So some of this
Yeah.
process that you're talking about is going to require at least people to go, huh, why are we doing this again? And it's like, it's just better to say, I'm not selling today. I'm getting ready for the day that at some point I'm going to sell. It could be to family, it could be to strategic, it could be to PE. The last thing that we want to do is to wait until it's too long and spring it upon you. And oh, by the way, here's how we're structuring your compensation. So that's my contrarian take. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but that's my take on that.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely not one that I've heard a ton outside of like the startup space, maybe. Like the more tech focused, we're gonna build this to sell the but I think it definitely makes sense. And I agree with it, and it probably plays into a conversation that I commonly have of people asking, when do I tell people that we're selling? And this is usually, while we're into the transaction, right? So it's much later than what you're talking about. But we usually end up at this kind of conclusion of where they're worried about how the employees are going to react, right? And they build this relationship with them and they don't want to, hurt their feelings or broadside them. And we usually get to this point of if you think that they're going to react poorly now, how do you think they'll react when they find out after the deal's already done, right? if you typically it's just going to get worse. And so the earlier you can kind of massage it and involve them tactfully, I think it definitely makes sense.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that you've got 100 employees that all 100 have to be up to date on your thoughts on when you're going to exit,
Right.
but your core staff, 20, 30, 40 employees, whatever, 10, whatever it is, they should know when they walk into the office on a Tuesday where the company's at and what the plan is for the next 3, 6, 4, 12 months, whatever it might be. Because if their bonus structure is tied to a the current company's year over year marks, and then b an exit, again it just incentivizes them. And so when you come to them and say, hey, here by the way, we're
Right.
selling for $15 million, and we got an offer for 15 million, and this is what that means for you. They're excited. And so maybe unpack that. And I know each state's different, so caveat, all the caveats here.
Yeah.
But how can owners structure bonuses for key employees post acquisition to help make sure that the employees stay and possibly help the owner get the earn out because they've stayed to help the company maintain or grow?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and everyone handles it a little differently. So obviously, one thing you can do early on is, give key employees some equity in your company. Now, there's tons of legal and tax considerations to doing that, but it's definitely a commonly used, way to attract and retain employees, and can work well and can ultimately result in, in the deals we do, it's common to see some sort of rollover element with some of the existing owners, and so we've seen key employees kind of participate in that rollover, and have it work very well. Um, we've also seen um, the sellers divert some of the compensation they're receiving at the deal to pay directly to employees as bonuses, and typically the buyer will want to structure that in a certain way to incentivize them to stay, whether that's like a tiered kind of tranche system, or a repayment if they leave within a certain amount of time. So those can definitely um, be super, uh, what's the word, not lucrative. They can definitely incentivize your employees to work towards a potential exit, and then stay on for the long term.
Yeah, well, and this your point about having that M&A attorney come in, understand the nuances you mentioned there, how to structure this, how to set it up, and how to. You mentioned the buyers will want they're getting paid a bonus on closing, and then bonus B is 6 months later, and bonus C is a year later, or whatever it might
Yeah.
be, because they got to earn their money back, right? That's what they bought this thing, uh, and so we can kind of speculate from the outside of what that might look like, but the experienced M&A attorney is going to go, oh well, here's what we normally see, right? Here's normally what buyers want, and that's where the injury attorney or divorce attorney or whatever would not really have an opinion on because they haven't seen enough to really have that data, and that's why I think you talk about, I say M&A is a high stakes game. It is. It's super high stakes, and so a lot of sellers I think are missing the boat because they don't realize it is high stakes. It is high reward, obviously, for the owner and the buyer potentially. But it could be a high reward for the employees and a lot of people. But you got to have a great team. If you don't have a great team, you're going to potentially lose money, open yourself up for lawsuits. Not
Totally.
understanding
Yeah.
an equity sale versus an asset sale and the tax implications of that. That's a pretty much, for a $50 million deal, I'm sure that could come up a lot. But for smaller deals, we see that like, hey, well, someone wants to buy a
Totally. Yeah.
company. Well, what are they buying? The equity or the asset? Oh, I don't know. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you should probably figure that out. So maybe unpack that, like why that is so important, just to know that which seems kind of basic when you're in the world, but if you're new to the world of M&A, you don't know that there's equity and asset sales potentially.
Yeah. Are you asking us specifically the difference between equity and asset deals?
Yeah, maybe unpack that for
Or
people who don't. Yeah, kind of like who obviously the buyers are going to probably want the assets and the owners are probably want the equity. Maybe unpack what the difference is and why they kind of view it differently.
yeah, so when you're selling your business, I mean, it's important. I guess to kind of separate the business from yourself, and this gets sometimes hard in the sub $10 million range because they just view everything as the business, right? But you have your business that's the legal entity. So you are the member of, usually it's an LLC, right? So you're the member of the LLC. Then that entity owns all sorts of assets. And in companies with fixed assets, that's really easy. You got trucks and equipment and all that stuff. But there's also more intangible assets like your contracts, your intellectual property, things like that. So you can structure the sale in one of two ways. The buyer can come in and essentially take your place in that business. So they'll buy what you own in the business and they'll just take over and the business will operate as it always has been. Or that business can sell all of its assets, so all the equipment and everything that I mentioned, to the buyer, which will be a new company. And so the everything will continue to function the same, but it will now be under a new umbrella of this new buyer company. That's the kind of the legal structure of the deal. The reason it matters is mostly tax implications. A buyer, it's typically more tax favorable for a buyer to acquire assets versus acquire stock, because they get a step up in basis and all sorts of tax rules that I vaguely understand, but I won't comment a ton on because I'm not an expert. For sellers, it's typically more tax advantageous to sell the equity in the company versus selling the assets because of capital gains treatment, but there's ways to transact around that too, even with an asset sale. Um, so tax considerations typically lean towards the buyer wanting an asset sale and the seller wanting a stock sale, although most of the time we end up just doing an asset sale anyways. The caveat with that is if you have key contracts that are not assignable, sometimes that will necessitate a stock deal. Um, we see this a lot with government contracts because government contracts are hard to assign and have anti-assignment provisions. So if you're a big government contractor, you should definitely mention that to a buyer and know that that might result in the stock deal, which usually means the buyer's going to want to pay a little bit less because they're not getting the favorable tax treatment.
Yeah, there's there's all kind of little nuances there that you've got to watch out for.
And and
Go ahead.
sorry to cut you off, but I guess that's the point of like assembling a good deal team is like
Hmm.
there's tons of issues in M&A that you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
Like from a law perspective, litigators, they have a judge constantly telling them whether they're right or wrong and checking their shoulder. And if they screw something up, it's pretty immediate that they know that they screwed up. But like your deal lawyer, he could be screwing stuff up for years, and if nobody ever calls them out on it, then it just keeps going and going and going. You can run into all sorts of tax and legal and weird issues just by not knowing what you don't know. And so that's why having an elite deal team all across the board is just super important.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned bad actors a minute ago, and I want to circle back around to that because
Yeah.
if you're new to a space, whether it's M&A or anything, people will ask certain questions from certain perspectives, and you might take offense. Like, why are you asking that? And so, how do you help clients understand? No, this is bad faith. No, this is just normal. It might make you feel uncomfortable, but this is just they're going to ask that. Like, this is normal. And so, how do you help clients understand what is a bad actor or a bad faith question, maybe versus uncomfortable but normal?
Yeah, I think it's hard because the process, while it's collaborative, it's also adversarial, right? And so there's going to be times when there's going to be conflict and buyers are going to ask hard questions and have hard conversations and there's going to be disagreements on all sorts of stuff, right? And that is totally normal and expected. I think where I spot bad actors most, especially from the buyer side, is when you can tell they're trying to take advantage of the lack of the seller's knowledge and experience with the situation. We had one deal in particular that I remember that we would have a call with the lawyers. We even had a couple all hands calls, and everyone would be on the same page, right? And our client felt like their voice was heard and things were good. Then after the call, they would get a call from the buyer directly that said, "Hey, we want to meet with you tomorrow to discuss this further." and they say, okay, let me call my lawyer. And they're like, no, your lawyer absolutely cannot be there. We don't want to meet with you, with your lawyer. And then they would proceed to bring in all these unreasonable terms that were just completely out of market, and trying to say that, we were the ones holding up the deal, but just trying to do the end around and capitalize on something where the seller just didn't know what was right and what was wrong. So actions like that, where like they're clearly just trying to, get you to agree to something without proper consideration, or things like that, to me is what smells of someone just trying to take advantage.
Yeah, that's not good. Like, hey, call me directly, but don't tell your lawyer. I'm
Yeah,
trying to save
yeah.
you a fee. I'm trying to keep you. No, that's probably not true.
And I think in my experience, every good buyer wants the seller to be fully informed and to do a fair deal. Like, there's probably some new buyers out there that are like, oh yeah, if I can get the right seller, I'll just get the deal of a lifetime and they'll never know any better. But I think those are very few and far between. Like, most good buyers want you to feel like you got a fair shake and want you to be fully informed in the process. And so if there's indications that they don't want that, that's where I start raising red
Yeah.
flags.
Well, I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, if you're trying to, you think about the burger analogy. If you're selling the dollar menu burger, right? And so if you're attracting those type
Right.
of buyers, they might want that because they don't have a lot of money. They can't. They need a great deal. The person who mailed you about your house, they're trying to flip it or whatever they're trying to do. They're trying to get a discount. And so if you're trying to sell for premium, but you don't set up a premium path, you're going to attract buyers who don't want to pay trip premiums, and they might be shady, or they might not be shady. They have a motivation that's different than yours, and so attracting premium buyers means you go a certain way. And I think that's kind of the lesson there is like, okay, you don't. There are shady actors at at all sorts of levels, of course, but it's easier to spot them. The more valuable you make your company, the more process you take to get ready to exit, because then all of a sudden, the people who are shady, in my experience, are going to want to go fast. They're going to go quick. They're really going to rush. It's like, well, okay,
Yeah.
this is not how this is going to work. Sorry, we can't close
Yeah.
next Thursday. You just talked to us today. Sorry, that's not how it's going to work.
Right. Totally. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Agreed.
so what would be the one thing you'd say to sellers right now? You said, hey, seller, today, if you hear this, go do this. What's the one piece of advice you'd give them?
I think it's put together a deal team, right? Like, if you have any inclinations that you might want to sell your business, go start building the deal team. In my mind, that's probably 4 to 5 people. And you probably start with whoever's first in your network. And so I'm going to list these out, but it's probably not in order. But you're going to want an M&A planner slash wealth advisor. I see some intersection there, but those could be two different people. Probably a business broker, an M&A attorney, obviously, an accountant who has experience with M&A deals, and then maybe a fractional CFO or outsourced bookkeeping type thing if you don't already have that. Those are kind of the big heavy hitters for me to feel things out. They're going to provide value to your business even if you don't end up selling, but having the deal team put together and ready to go can just make the process so much easier.
Fractional CFOs might be the most slept on thing in the industry. Like, they can do
Yeah.
so much for your business. Now, you mentioned CPAs. So the only question I have there is tax attorney or CPA? What's your thoughts on that?
Um, in my experience, probably a CPA. I Don't get me wrong, tax attorney absolutely needs to be involved, but like in the preliminary planning stages, I don't know how much value they're going to provide, and they're probably going to tell you that. So bring them in like around the LOI is probably when I would first involve a tax attorney.
Okay, so later on, not at the start. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so where can people check you out, find you online, social media? It's been great. I've enjoyed it. There's always so much to learn and to think about it on the M&A world. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, no, it's been great talking to you. Probably the easiest way is just on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it nowadays. My handle is at Sellers Council. My DMs are open there, and then I think I've got a link there that you can send me an email too. But happy to chat with anyone that's involved in M&A or interested in buying or selling businesses. I absolutely love what I do. It's great.
Yeah, M&A is, we went fishing last year with my family, and we caught a little fish and a big fish, and I was trying to make the EBITDA versus adjusted EBITDA joke, and my kids were like, Dad, Dad, and I'm like, I don't really care about EBITDA, but it is a good joke. Like it is a really
Yeah.
good joke, and so it is a space that it's I've worked on some international stuff, and so like that's kind of it's just a cool world, right? So like the international world's kind
Yeah.
of unique, the M&A world's kind of unique. It's just a cool world, and so I'm with you. I do enjoy meeting the different players in the space. So, anyways, thank you for your time. We'll link to all your stuff, and look forward to chatting again soon. And best of luck to BYU next year. Well, I would say best of luck, but okay, second to Tech, but
Hey, I'm hoping we get a rematch. We don't get a regular season one, which maybe
no,
that gets us in the playoff next year if
yeah,
they come to their senses. But hoping we can see you guys again.
all right, man.
That's a wrap. Thank you so much for staying to the end. And if you want to join the Exit Ready cohort, click on the link below or just sign up for the newsletter to make sure that you never miss an update from me about what is going on in the world of exiting your company.